What illegal thing do you do on a regular basis? Story 1. When I was in college, parking was $500 semester, which I couldn't afford. I simply went to class each day until I got a parking ticket. I went online, paid the $50 fine, but kept the ticket. Every time I would park on campus, I would toss the ticket out onto my windshield so that the parking police thought I was already ticketed. This worked for 2 years, $1,000 worth of parking for $100. And then I came out of class one day to find 2 tickets and note that said, "Nice try." Story 2. When I was younger, me and my sister were driving down the road when we saw a roadkill raccoon. We decided to pull over to see if it was still alive. It wasn't, but it had a baby raccoon trying to cuddle up to it. We felt bad and took him in. He lived with us for about 14 years until he died. Apparently, it's illegal to own a raccoon without a license, but raccoons only live for around 3 years in the wild, so I like to think we gave him a pretty good life for an orphan raccoon, regardless of it being illegal. We live in a small town and regularly took him on walks to the park and stuff. He loved people and sat on my shoulder while I was on a 4th of July parade float. R.I.P. Bandit. Story 3. When I was a kid, I thought it was normal that we could buy movies the day after they came out from the Chinese lady in the chicken shop. I didn't realize it was a crime until middle school, when I told someone my grandma had Avatar on DVD and they said that was impossible since the movie was still in theaters. Story 4. I remember I worked for a couple of Indian folks back in the day, and they were boasting about having the new Transformers movies through some download service, and because I wanted to see the movie so bad, I caved and asked them about it. For some reason, I was concerned that surely I would be the one to get in some kind of trouble for it. Anyway, I go home, convince myself to download the movie at around 11 p.m., start playing it just after midnight, and some point within the next 30 minutes, I hear a loud and urgent-sounding knock on my front door after midnight, after downloading this video. I tiptoe down and say, "Who is it?" through the door, where they then announced it was the city of police, to please open up. What the fo? I opened the door, and they quickly stated there was a break-in at the place I worked at and managed for, that I need to go in to make a statement and check things over. Last time I ever downloaded a movie, first time was enough for me. Story 5. I have never told anyone about this before, but back when I was 15, 1979, I stole a Datsun 240Z car in my neighborhood. I was walking home from S.A. friend's house one hot summer night, and as I walked by this cool Z car, I noticed a single key sticking out of the driver's door lock. I had always thought that that car was cool and thought it would have been bitchin' to drive. Well, it was. So I kinda looked around and saw no signs of life anywhere, so I got in and drove it off. It was a super nice car. I drove all around the valley, grew up in Palm Springs. This car was too nice to be treated to a joyride, so after a few hours of driving it, I took it back and parked it right back in its parking spot at about 4 a.m. I figured it was very unlikely that the owner would even know it had drove, other than it missing about a 1/3 of tank of gas. But I did keep the key because they would think the just misplaced it somewhere. And I guess that's exactly what they did, because a couple of weeks later I did the same thing, only this time it was almost out of gas, so I had to put some in it. Did the second time just like the first time. About a week later I did it again. That time I drove it up to Big Bear Lake because I was dying to drive it on mountain roads. It was a blast. Until I stopped at a little gas market to get a snack and bumped into one of my older brother's good friend who knew I was only 15 and didn't have driver's license or a car, much less a vintage sports car. I can't remember the lies I told him, but knew I was going to be in deep shit when I got home. I hauled ass back to PS, stopped at 7-Eleven and filled the car with gas, and snuck it back into their driveway, took a pen and scribbled out a thank you note and told them that I really loved their car and they really shouldn't leave the key in the door overnight. "Oh, and BTW, I filled the tank for you. Thanks. Oh, and my brother's friend. He never said a word to anyone about seeing me." Story 6. Funny story. The last year I did my own business taxes, I cheated every way I could think of, abused the gray area, and fudged my numbers a bit so that I was only going to have to pay $1,200. Before filing, I found out I was going to have to go through a bank audit for a large loan I was applying for, so I paid an accountant to do my taxes. The accountant did them completely legally. Turns out I was owed a refund. After paying the accountant, I still ended up getting a check back from the IRS. Accountants can be worth far more than they charge. Story 7. In 94 Fours, I had an '87 Toyota Celica in black. It was a really nice car when I bought it, but it had a missing hubcap. Not knowing where to get a replacement, I stole a hubcap from another Celica in my neighborhood. I was dumb and 17, yo. I drove that car for 2 years until I got into an accident. Since I no longer needed the hubcap, I put it back on the car I stole it from 2 years earlier. I always wondered what the owner thought about it. Story 8. I smuggle construction materials and technical gear into Mexico to avoid the heavy tax, and on the way home, smuggle much-needed prescription drugs for people who cannot afford them. One of my workers' asthma inhaler is $325 on their medical plan, and $25 over-the-counter in Mexico, exact same manufacturer, labels, and packaging. Story 9. I just want to know what idiot made it illegal in Detroit to tie your alligator to a fire hydrant. We truly live in a fascist state. It's my ducking alligator, and I can do what I want with her. Story 10. From the ages of 16 to 22, I drove without a license or insurance. My grandma, that sweet and innocent doll that she was, taught me to drive when I was 12. She couldn't drive because of cataracts, and she needed stuff for shepherd's pie. We practiced for about an hour, then headed onto the highway to the store. That was back in the 80s. I couldn't imagine trying to pull that off today. Story 11. As a teenager, my friends and I would trespass through a guy's property so that we could sit near the river and just hang out. We did it 2 or 3 times a week. I'm almost certain the old man that owned the land knew about it and just didn't care. But we never technically got permission to be there. There was a period of time when I first moved out where I would technically loiter in front of my workplace for a little bit. I was carpooling with someone that worked in a nearby business. If I got out earlier than her, I would wait around for that hour in the car. Lastly, the grocery store I shop at sells the best donuts I have ever consumed. These Fruity Pebble ones they have are almost certainly the least healthy thing I eat these days, but they taste like heaven. Unfortunately, the grocery store doesn't seem to have the donuts in the system at the self-checkout. So I just say I'm purchasing a cookie instead for a drastically lower price. Story 12. I'm sure a ton. A few years back, I stopped caring about laws almost completely because too many were far too absurd. Life improved remarkably almost instantly. I still obey most traffic rules as it's truly necessary for safety on a shared road. Still pay my taxes, etc. I don't do anything that directly harms anyone or the shared environment. Outside of that, I don't even bother learning the laws anymore. I just go on with my life trying to be a thoughtful person, but mostly doing whatever I want. Story 13 lived in California. The city we lived in required any swimming pool deeper than fur-eft to be fenced. Apparently, someone saw my bucket of water in my side yard and called us in and we were fined. For a bucket of water. So we would routinely set out a bucket of water, and when we saw the cops coming, we'd quickly discard the water. The cops kept driving out for nothing. TBH, they probably hated getting called out for such a minor issue, but dagnabbit, I was gonna make my money back in fuel cost. Story 14. I used to subscribe to like 4 different streaming services with my roommates. Eventually, I learned about Radar and other similar RR softwares. My mates and I pooled in money, and now we have a Synology Home NAS server with 50-plus TB storage. We are slowly buying hard drives with the money that would have been set aside for services, and almost all of the movies we watch are like 100 times better looking than any streaming service would have provided. It only started as a way for us to watch movies that we wanted to, but streaming services have dropped, but now we have a database for the house, backups for albums, Pi-hole and many other home entertainment and lighting systems being ran through it. Best of all, we own that shit and can move it whenever we want. And aside from the initial setup and the move to a server setup, we never touch that shit. It updates itself, finds subtitles by itself, and even catalogs by itself, and has acute information packets like Prime Video shows, and we also saw so many featurettes for classic movies. Story 15. Eating food at Whole Foods, then returning it for 3 years, telling customer service I didn't like it and got a full refund, wearing high-end clothes, then returning within the return window. Overdraft my checking account to put that into a retirement account and negotiate with the bank to not close my account because it was accidental. Not driving without insurance for a year because there were no plate readers where I live. Booking first-class tickets to get access to the lounge with fully refunded tickets, then canceled and got economy.